Welcome, everyone. Before we start, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Drop a comment below. Also, tell me what kind of stories you'd love to hear. Stay tuned till the end. Story 1. A few years ago, I was already struggling with anxiety, but nothing could have prepared me for what was about to happen. It started with small noises outside my bedroom window, barely noticeable at first. The occasional rustle, a faint crunch of gravel, something brushing lightly against the glass. Every single night, without fail, I would lie there, straining my ears, my pulse quickening. But by the time I gathered the courage to check, there was nothing there. It got to the point where I started waking my parents, pleading with them to look outside. But each time, they found nothing. I began to feel paranoid. Was I imagining things? Was my mind playing tricks on me? But then, one morning, my grandfather found something disturbing. A lawn chair placed directly beneath our bathroom window. That window was high up, the bottom pane fogged, nearly impossible to see through. But someone had put that chair there. Someone had been trying. The following night, I heard the noises again. I tried to ignore them, but the next morning, we found something worse. A small stepladder positioned perfectly outside my bedroom window, and on my windowsill, a bag of cold McDonald's food. Most of it untouched. My stomach churned. Someone had been sitting there, watching me, eating their meal as if this was just another ordinary night for them. We called the police. They searched the area, but found nothing. No footprints, no leads. They told us to be cautious, but without a suspect, there was little they could do. That night, I sewed my curtains shut. I thought it would stop them, but they were not done. The next night, we found evidence that they had climbed higher, handprints on our air conditioning unit, footprints on top of the garbage bin. They were determined to see inside. Then came the most chilling discovery. I heard it as it happened, a faint, deliberate scratching sound. I lay still, holding my breath, listening. The next morning, I inspected my window and found it. A hole in the screen, jagged at the edges, slowly carved away. Nearby, we found the tool, a sharpened stick. Whoever it was, they had been doing this in increments, patiently breaking through my screen night after night. The next night, I heard something different. A single step on the gravel, a pause, then another. My heart pounded so hard I was afraid it would give me away. I kept my eyes shut, pretending to be asleep, and let out a small, groggy sound before rolling just out of sight. I stayed still, barely breathing, then slowly reached for my bedroom door and crept down the hall. I did not knock on my parents' door. I just slipped inside. "There is someone outside," I whispered. They reacted immediately. My father grabbed a bat. My mother reached for her phone. We had no time to think. My father planned to go through the back, my mother through the front. I rushed to the bathroom, standing on the edge of the tub to get a better view. Then the back door flew open. A dark figure leapt off the garbage bin, sprinting down the driveway. My father shouted after him. My mother screamed. He did not stop. He ran across the street, disappearing behind a neighbor's house. But then, something terrifying happened. He peeked back out, just for a moment, as if taunting us. He was not afraid. We called the police again, but by the time they arrived, he was gone. We thought it was over. Maybe he had moved on, and he had, but not in the way we hoped. A few weeks later, I overheard a conversation in the neighborhood. A man had broken into a house just a few doors down, a home with 2 little girls inside. Their father woke to find him standing in their room, watching them sleep. He had gotten inside, and he had been waiting. They never caught him. Even now, years later, I still hear noises outside my window. Sometimes I check, sometimes I do not. But I know deep down that someone was out there, and maybe somewhere he still is. Story 2. I met him the same night I met my boyfriend. He was older, maybe 10 years or so, but I barely spoke to him. There was nothing about him that interested me, and our conversations were limited to polite, impersonal exchanges. A few words here and there, never anything beyond what was necessary. I thought that was the end of it. But then he followed us. My boyfriend and I had gone to a club one night when I noticed him lingering near the entrance. At first, I thought it was a coincidence, but his eyes never left me. He stayed just far enough away that I could not call it an encounter, but close enough that I knew it was deliberate. I tried to ignore it, but my unease grew with every glance in his direction. I finally grabbed my friend's hand and rushed to the bathroom, my heart racing. My boyfriend confronted him while I hid. Later, he told me the man had started crying, rambling like a child who had been scolded. We left that night, and I prayed that would be the last time I saw him. A month passed, and I had almost forgotten about him. Then a letter appeared in my mailbox. It was not mailed. He had delivered it himself. The writing was obsessive, filled with declarations of love, like we had shared something deep and meaningful. My blood ran cold. He had followed me home. He knew where I lived. A year passed in uneasy silence. I avoided the place where I had first met him, knowing he still lingered there. Apart from a few unsettling run-ins in the city. There was nothing significant until exactly 1 year after I started dating my boyfriend, another letter arrived. He acted as if nothing had happened, as if we had been in a relationship this entire time, as if the year of silence did not exist. He asked me out casually, like an old lover trying to rekindle a romance. I did not respond. I did not acknowledge it. Then we moved. I thought it would end there, a fresh start. But one summer day, I saw him again at the mall. At first, I dismissed it as coincidence. Then I saw him again and again, always at a distance, always pretending not to see me, but never looking away for long. My skin prickled every time, but I told myself I was overreacting. Then a store owner pulled me aside. He had been watching. "That man follows you," he said. "Every time you turn around, he hides." My stomach lurched. He had been there the whole time, watching, waiting. The shopkeeper promised to alert mall security. He spread the word to other store owners. They all kept an eye out. I was grateful, but it did not change the fact that he was still out there. He knew where I was. It has been years. I should not still be afraid, but I am. I need a job, but I will not work as a waitress. He would find me, sit in the restaurant for hours, watching. I avoid the city center, knowing that is where he lingers. I do not go to the mall alone. I stay away from certain supermarkets and cafes because I know he frequents them. I do not even know his last name, yet he has control over where I go, what I do, and how I live. I have thought about leaving the city, starting fresh somewhere else, but even if I did, he knows my full name. I know nothing about him beyond his face and his first name. If he wanted to, he could find me, and soon it will become even easier. I am about to finish university. I plan to become a professor. My information will be public. My name, my schedule, my lectures. He will know exactly where to find me. He could walk into my classes. He could wait outside my office. He could follow me again. And there would be nothing I could do to stop him. Story 3. He was my boyfriend once, but the stalking began after the breakup. Looking back, the relationship itself had been a warning sign. We had been friends for years before dating. I was in my junior year of high school, and he had already graduated. At first, everything seemed fine, but then he changed. Or maybe he just stopped hiding who he really was. He became possessive. He would take my phone, scroll through my messages, demand to know who I was talking to. He never wanted to be apart, even if I was studying or working. And then there were the phone calls from random girls, threatening me, telling me they were going to take him from me. He thrived on jealousy, turning every argument into a spectacle. When we fought, he would throw his phone across the room, sometimes across the street. And every time I tried to leave, he made sure I did not. At least 7 times, I tried to end it. Every time, he would call relentlessly, crying, threatening to hurt himself. He would beg me to talk, to listen, until I was so exhausted that I would finally say, "If I agree to get back together, will you leave me alone?" It was not love. It was survival. One time after I broke up with him, he claimed he had gone to the doctor that very day and had been diagnosed with a brain aneurysm. He told me he had only 8 months to live. He knew exactly how to manipulate me. We had lost 2 friends to car accidents on the same date, a year apart. His supposed expiration date was set to fall right in line with theirs. I convinced myself it was a sign that we were cursed. So I stayed, but I had to get out. College was my way out. I began looking at out-of-state schools, knowing that if I could just make it through a few more months, I would be free. Then, one day, I saw him looking at the college brochures I had left on my desk. The next thing I knew, he was talking about enrolling. He even took the SATs. My plan was falling apart. I needed something drastic, something he could not follow me into. So I did the most extreme thing I could think of. I enlisted in the Army. It did not work. A week later, he was sitting across from a recruiter. He was trying to enlist too. That was when I knew he would never let me go. I backed out. I found a way to get released from my enlistment. And eventually, somehow, I managed to leave him. I changed my number. I cut off all our mutual friends. For the first time in years, I thought I was free. But then, I started seeing him, not up close, not at first, just glimpses at the movie theater, in the parking lot of places we had never even been to together. I would turn a corner and he would be there, pretending it was all just a coincidence. If he saw me with another guy, even a family member, his face would twist with rage. But he never approached me. He just watched. I moved 90 minutes away for college, hoping distance would finally be enough. It was not. I heard from mutual friends that he had been on campus. He told people he was visiting others, but I knew why he was really there. I stayed in my dorm on the nights he was in town, refusing to risk seeing him. Then, one of our old friends died. I came home for the funeral, knowing he would be there. I tried to avoid him, but he latched onto me the moment he saw me. That night, at a friend's house, he sat beside me, pressing too close, trying to touch me. I flinched away, but he would not take the hint. When I left, he found my new number. The calls and texts started again. Day after day, week after week. It went on for years, 5 years. Now, I live in another state. I have no ties left to the people I once knew, and still, every time I visit my hometown, I scan every room, every parking lot, every sidewalk, because I know he is still out there, and I know if he ever sees me again, he will not let me walk away. Story 4. His name was Bob. He was my classmate, and from the moment I met him, something felt off. He tried too hard, constantly flirting with every girl in class, forcing awkward jokes, acting as if he needed to prove something. It was not hard to see through. At first, I ignored him. He was annoying, but not necessarily threatening. He made bad jokes, hovered too close, laughed too loudly at things that were not funny. But something about his desperation unsettled me. The way he needed everyone to see him as something he was not. One day, after yet another forced conversation where he tried to convince me of how much of a ladies' man he was, I casually suggested that maybe he should stop pretending, that if he stopped running from himself, he might actually find happiness. I did not think much of it. It was an offhand comment, something I said as I walked away. But Bob took it as a challenge. The next day, in chemistry class, he plopped down beside me with an exaggerated grin. "Looks like we are lab partners," he said. "It is chemistry." I let out an awkward laugh, brushing it off as another one of his cringeworthy jokes. But as the days passed, I realized this was not just a joke to him. Bob was everywhere. Between classes, he would find me. He would rush across campus just to meet me at my locker, acting like it was just a coincidence. He started bringing me gifts, fortune cookies, every single time. I am Asian. It did not take long for the discomfort to settle in my bones. I thought if I ignored him, he would move on. I was wrong. One afternoon, not long after I had gotten home, the doorbell rang. I was not expecting anyone. I peeked through the window and felt my stomach drop. Bob, standing on my front porch. Panic surged through me. This was before social media, before easy access to personal information online. The only way he could have known where I lived was if he had followed me home. I stayed frozen, hoping he would just go away. Then he started knocking. At first, it was soft, tentative, but when I did not answer, the knocking turned to pounding. He started shouting my name. I took a slow step back, trying to stay quiet, but my foot hit the edge of the coffee table, making a small noise. The knocking stopped. A sick silence filled the space between us. I knew he was still there, just on the other side of the door, listening. Then he started again, louder, more desperate. I grabbed the nearest thing I could, a baseball bat. My hands shook as I gripped the handle, debating whether to call someone or confront him myself. I did not want him to think I was afraid. I did not want to give him power over me. With a deep breath, I threw open the door. His face changed the second he saw me. Whatever confidence had been fueling him drained in an instant. He stammered something incoherent, his eyes darting between me and the bat. I stepped forward, gripping it tighter. He took a step back. I took a step forward. His hands went up, shaking his head. I did not say a word. I just kept walking toward him. By the time I reached the driveway, he turned and ran. The next day, I reported everything to the school. I expected shock, outrage. Instead, the administrators barely reacted. "You are not the first," one of them said. Turns out, Bob had done this before. Multiple times, he had followed other girls home, shown up uninvited, stood outside their doors, begging for dates, and just like that, he was gone. I never saw him again. No one spoke about him. Teachers avoided the topic. His name vanished from attendance records. It was as if he had never existed, but I knew better. He had been real, and for a moment, he had been right outside my door. Story 5. I had a friend in high school who definitely crossed the line into stalker territory. It was common knowledge that he had a thing for me. At first, I tried to be polite. I turned him down subtly, hoping he would take the hint. When that did not work, I made it clear. Firm, direct, undeniable. No, never. Not going to happen. Ever. I figured he would move on. After all, we were in high school. Crushes fade. People grow up, except he did not. Years passed, and I was in my senior year of college when he resurfaced. His sister went to a university just south of mine while he was studying a bit farther north. They reached out, saying they wanted to visit, catch up, maybe crash at my place for a night. I saw no harm in it. It sounded innocent enough, so I agreed. The visit itself was unremarkable. We hung out, talked, and then they both left the next day. It was not until the morning after that I realized something was off. My roommates had a set of magnetic letters on the fridge. I barely paid attention to them, just something goofy we all played around with. But that morning, one of my roommates was staring at the fridge, reading something. She turned to me, laughing. "Did you write this?" I walked over and read it. It was a love poem. A ridiculously dramatic, over-the-top confession of undying love. My stomach dropped. I knew exactly where it came from. My roommates were still laughing, thinking it was some kind of joke. But I felt sick. A few days later, I got an email from him. He brought up the poem, but what he said made my skin crawl. He told me he had woken up in the middle of the night and seen me reading it, that it was hot to watch me, that he had loved the way I reacted, except I had not seen the poem until the morning after he left. Panic set in. How could he have seen me reading something I had not even looked at yet? Then I remembered his sister had dyed her hair the same color as mine. He must have woken up in the night, seen her standing near the fridge, and in his blurry, half-asleep state, mistaken her for me. The realization did not make me feel better. I tried to create distance, avoid him, ignore the messages. I figured he would finally get the message, but he did not. Instead, the emails became more unhinged. I was preparing for graduation, looking at jobs abroad, when he sent me something that made my blood run cold. If you are moving abroad, we need to get married. It will make sense to my parents if I follow you that way. You will need to support me when we move, because I have no desire to learn the language. But do not worry, it will be beneficial for you too. You can eventually profit from tax deductions, and you will not die sad and alone after paying full taxes for your entire life. It is the logical choice. I stared at the screen, my body rigid. Then the email devolved into something darker. He started ranting about how he hated characters in books and movies who said, "I just want the person I love to be happy, even if it is not with me." He said it was irrational, that it made more sense to just eliminate the competition and force love to work in his favor. I had never felt so disturbed in my life. I responded, furious and more terrified than I had ever been. He seemed to get the message. He apologized and I cut off all contact. But our lives were too tangled. We had too many mutual friends. I was close to his family. Even as I tried to move on, he was still there, lingering at the edges of my life. Then he got a girlfriend. I thought, finally, maybe this meant he was moving on. Maybe I could stop looking over my shoulder. Then she added me on Facebook. At first, I assumed it was innocent. Then she started messaging me, talking about how amazing their sex life was, telling me I was missing out, encouraging me to sleep with him just once. I told her in no uncertain terms that I was not interested. She responded by telling me about her other boyfriend. Then she said we should all get married together, all four of us. A shared wedding, a shared life. I blocked her immediately. 3 years passed. I thought I was safe. Then I heard he had moved back to my hometown. Not just back, but in with the only 3 close friends I still had from high school. They insisted he was over it, that he had changed, that he had moved on. I could only hope they were right. Or maybe my distaste for My Little Pony had finally knocked me off the pedestal he had put me on.